Hello, everyone.
My was good. Just saying.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Crowd Chatter podcast. And for today, we have the grand return of Jacob Serbenski. He is back today, everybody. It's so good. We're both back once again on the podcast, and hey, we're actually doing it in the morning. It's not even a nighttime video.
I know I work today, so got
Yeah,
work today. So I just had to get a few cleanings done, but other than that we're good. So
yeah. How
ready to
about
start jamming.
yeah? How about that? But today, guys, will be some college football episodes. I did tell you guys last week that maybe I was going to be doing something along the lines of like overviews for the teams, like preseason stuff. But Jacob ended up being available today, so we're gonna do
Twin
something.
totals.
So we're gonna do something kind of similar to what we did last season. If you guys remember that, we did the over under stuff for like total wins. I don't have any information. Stravinsky does. So last year he was the one that went over all the numbers, and we both just kind of predicted what we thought. So it's gonna be the same thing this year. And well, first is the Big Ten. Let's just get this party started. Jacob, take it
And
away.
this year from betting places, not just whatever I think a good win total is going to be. So these are Vegas Vegas Insiders win totals as of the 13th of June of 2022. So we start in the Big Ten, and we'll start with the defending reigning the Michigan Wolverines, who went 12 and 2 last year with college football playoff appearance, losing a heartbreaker on the road to Michigan State and getting smacked around by the national champion Georgia. It was stupid good. So Vegas has the win total at points. We have the schedule being Colorado State and Connecticut and non-con, and then we go to Big Ten play to take on Maryland road against Iowa and Indiana. You got your two big Penn State, Michigan State at home, on the road taking on Rutgers, and the three with Nebraska and Illinois at home, and on the road to Columbus, Ohio to play the Buckeyes. So pretty easy schedule. A lot of the games that I would consider 50-50 games are at home. Like Michigan, I would consider 50-50 games. So those are at home, which is helpful. Iowa on the road might be a little tricky, but I mean, we did beat them 42-3. But we were also a much better team last year than we were this year. Our defense is not going to be. Our defense is going to be the worry this year. Our offense, but the defense was, Aiden
Yes, Aiden Hutchinson back to the lines, baby.
I'm reasonably going under because I think it's going to fall right at that 9-3. Personally, looking at the schedule, I think it would be like a 10-2. But knowing Michigan, if I'm betting Michigan, they're going to trip up in one of these games. I would and probably go with a 9-3 season. Probably one of Penn State, Michigan State, we trip up to. At Ohio State, I've pretty much chalked up as a loss, and then maybe at Iowa. Michigan's going to somewhere where they should once or twice and probably be 9-3, but I can see a 10-2 easily.
So what was the over under 9.5?
9 would be 10-2. If you're going under, it would be 9-3 or over.
Yeah, so really in Michigan's entire schedule, I only see 4 games of which they could end up losing. So worst case scenario, they go 8-4. Best case scenario, they obviously go 12-0. I doubt that. I think we will at least lose to Ohio State. I'm basically just like Serbenski. I'm chalking that up to basically be a loss. There is no Michigan is not the team it was last season. The only reason we beat Ohio State last season is because our defense was really good. We had guys like Aiden Hutchinson, David Ojabo, Brad Hawkins, Daxton Hill. We had NFL talent on our defensive end that shut down that Ohio State offense. This year, we don't.
And the Ohio State defense just let us run up the middle on them every 2 plays.
Well, Ohio State's defense sucks. We all knew that, and they still do. But the thing about Ohio State this year, the thing about the Buckeyes this year is Now their best receiver is Jackson Smith and Jigba, and we all know how ridiculously talented that guy is. Not to mention a number two receiver is Marvin Harrison Jr. And then they have like another two, three, four, five guys who are like former number one wide receiver recruits in their class. Just no big deal. Not to mention Travion Henderson at running back, C.J. Stroud at quarterback. The Ohio State offense is probably even better than it was last season, and Michigan's defense has taken a major league step down with a defensive coordinator change, a lot of our great talent moving out. So it's going to be a lot of change on that end for the Wolverines. As for the offense, I think the Michigan offense will be fine. I think it's going to come down to what happens at the quarterback spot. Obviously, what happens between Cade McNamara and J.J. McCarthy is going to be huge this season. McCarthy, for the majority of the offseason, has had a shoulder injury, so he has not really been participating much in any of the offseason workouts. But I think that's gonna be very dependent on how Michigan plays this year. Because definitely, I think McNamara has like the low. He has the higher floor, but he also has a much lower ceiling. Yeah, he's much slower and he has a lower ceiling than JJ McCarthy. Because I think McCarthy could really end up being a great player. Anyways, pretty over under. I'm gonna go with over. I'm gonna say at least 10-2. Cause I don't. I mean, like I said, I only see 4 games of where I think Michigan could end up losing. My 2 losses for them would probably be Ohio State, and then take your pick between the other 3. I think they'll win the 2 games at home because Michigan State doesn't have Kenneth Walker anymore, which was their team last year, and Penn State is still pretty much like it was last year, maybe a little bit better.
We're waiting to see what
For Penn State, it'll depend on how good the running game is this year. And then as for Iowa, we all know what happens in Iowa City. That place is a death trap. That's probably our other loss. So and especially since that's a Big Ten championship rematch and it's in Iowa City, there's going to be a lot added fire to Iowa winning that game. So I'm going with 10-2 for the Wolverines.
next one's going to be really, really easy for me. So we have the Ohio State Buckeyes. They're runners in the Big Ten East. They last year losing to Oregon in the Big Two, and then losing to at the end of the season, and then they went to the bowl game and had one of the most fun Rose Bowls I've ever watched in the shootout with Utah, where it was like Jackson had like 400 yards or like 350 yards.
350 yards and like 4 touchdowns.
It was a Rose Bowl record. It was insane. They're obviously bringing back a lot of that firepower. You could honestly make I know Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave were good, but honestly, make the case that Jackson Smith-Njigba was still the best receiver on that team with first round picks.
Yeah, that's the crazy part.
Game. Then they play Arkansas State and Toledo to round out the non-conference. They play Wisconsin and Rutgers at home. Then they go on the road to East Lansing to take on Michigan State. Then they got Iowa at home. Finally, they actually some of the tougher teams out of the.
They don't have an easy schedule.
For once, they actually West out.
But they get both Iowa and Wisconsin.
They've got at Penn State,
but they're both at home.
At home against Indiana, on the road against Maryland, and at home against Michigan to end the year. I mean, their win total is 10.5. I still think they're going to go over. I don't see them losing more than a game. I mean, they could between Michigan State, Penn State, and Maryland. I think they win the Iowa and Wisconsin at home. I think they're only really tricky games that they could really trip up in feasibly. Maybe Notre Dame at the beginning of the year. But I think the C.J. Stroud, Jackson Smith-Njigba connection is enough to beat Notre Dame on its own. So they don't really have to worry about that too much. Then it's at Michigan State and at Penn State. I still don't know what Michigan State's going to be. I'm pretty sure they're going to be good, but I think for as good as Michigan State is, I think this Ohio State team is just
better.
Same thing with that Penn State. Like, maybe they lose because I would be shocked if that wasn't the whiteout. it has to be the whiteout, right? Ohio State comes
Even if it
has
isn't, everyone's just going to come in white anyway.
Exactly. They could trip up there. I could see a trip up there, and then Maryland, I feel like could catch them off guard but not beat them. So I don't see more than one loss for this team between take your pick of Penn State or Michigan State on the road. And that I see this Ohio State team walking as my favorite people. One of my favorite podcasts says, Cover 3. Check them out. They're awesome. They're gonna probably walk off the bus and drop 40, and then leave at least every single game. Ridiculous.
Yeah, 10.5 for the over-under. I'm honestly going the same way. Because as much as this schedule does look very intimidating, I think their biggest game, the defining chapter of their season is going to be right at the beginning, at home against Notre Dame. That game is going to be huge for the Buckeyes' success this season. That's going to set the tone for the year. Because that Notre Dame team is built defensively. It's built defensively by a defensive coach in Marcus Freeman. Ohio State obviously is built offensively, certainly not defensively. But even for Ohio State, they have brand new defensive coordinator coming over from Oklahoma State. Forget what his name is, but he was a former Oklahoma State defensive coordinator. Oklahoma State's defense last year was pretty solid, so we'll see how he does with the Buckeyes. But I think that's going to be a big game right at the beginning against Notre Dame, and I think that's 50-50. Because we know how fired up Notre Dame is with Marcus Freeman as their head coach. They're going to come into this season playing very hard. I think the only reason this is the only reason this is a 50-50 game right now is because Notre Dame doesn't have the recruiting class they do like they have next season, because the recruiting class already next year is insane. But this game, I think, is going to be close, but I'm going to give it to the Buckeyes, and that's where I think they'll just tear through the rest of this schedule. I don't see Wisconsin really being much of a problem for them. I'm not high on the Badgers because I'm not high on Graham Mertz. The only good players, their running back, who is good, but other than that, they don't really have that much else, and they lost some defensive players. Plus, it's a home game. Hard to win in Ohio State. Iowa never plays well on the road. Michigan State is a question mark this year. Penn State is another question mark this year. And that's their two toughest road games. So I think Ohio State maybe could lose one game, but I'm certainly going over for them.
100%. And now we go to the Michigan State Michigan State Spartans. Michigan Akron. Those are two pretty standard easy games. And then they go to Washington. How I feel about that? We'll get back to that one. You've got Minnesota at home, and then you've got at Maryland, and then you welcome Ohio State and Wisconsin to East Lansing. Then you go on the road to Ann Arbor to play rival Michigan. You go on the road to take on Penn State as they usually do at the end of the year. The over/under total is 7.5, and this is one of the trickier ones for me because I see this team as either an 8-4 or a 7-5 team. They're going to have 4 or 5 losses. This Michigan State team, because I really don't know what they're going to be. They're going to go 17-0, even though they're not 17 games. But honestly, I'm just gonna say I don't know if these are 50-50 games, but I'm gonna give them 3 losses right off the bat. I'm gonna give them Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State. Michigan and Penn State are winnable games. I don't think Ohio State probably is. And that leaves they could trip up against Wisconsin at home, Minnesota at home. My really big concern on the road, because again, Washington is another one of those teams that I'm like, I don't have in my head if I know if they're going to be decent or not. I think they're still 1 year away from being decent, but traveling across the country to a different time zone is never easy when you're playing football. And then at Illinois, just because Illinois, I feel like it's just one of those teams that can catch you off guard as a track team. I think I'm gonna go over. I think I'm gonna put them at 8-4, but I could see 7-2. But I'm gonna go 8-4 for now. But I don't know much about this team, so Mitch, take it away.
Yeah, I'm certainly going over for the Spartans. This team is very dependent on its transfers. They didn't really get a bunch of players in terms of like recruits, but they got a ton of transfers coming in on the defensive end and quite a few on the offensive end. Of course, their big transfers were they're both the running backs, of which they got Jalen Berger, I think his name is, from Wisconsin, and then they got Jared Broshek or something like that, big time running back from Colorado. That's going to be probably they're probably going to split carries from Michigan State. So we'll see if they can hopefully, the Michigan State hopes. They won't. But that's what probably the Spartans hope will add up to Kenneth Walker's success. Not going to happen. But for Michigan State, I certainly go over. I think their entire season is going to depend on their games between Washington and Michigan. I mean, that's a defining stretch of their season. You got Washington on the road, which, like Serbenski said, going to the West Coast. Many East Coast teams do not do well on the West Coast. They almost always struggle. And this was going to be a scenario for Michigan only 2 years ago until COVID happened, and then we canceled that game. I don't know what's supposed to happen now, but we were supposed to go to Washington. That didn't happen, and then they came here and we smoked the crap out of them just last year. But this Washington team is going through a head coaching change. Kalen DeBoer coming over from Fresno State, part of the ridiculous coaching cycle this year. If you have not watched my coaching carousel video, you can go check that out. It is on the channel a couple weeks ago, I think. But Minnesota, also an interesting team. Maryland is basically a poor man's version of Ohio State. They have an okay offense and a horrible defense. So Ohio State, that's a loss. Wisconsin, I mean, that's a question mark. And then as for the Wolverines, once again, that's another question mark. So I'm going over for them, but that stretch right there is going to determine their season, whether they have a great year or have a average, not so great year. It's going to be those games right there.
Now we go to the other Tiger by Aloha. You've got Terrapins, who did pretty decent last year. Ended up getting to a bowl game and I believe beating West Virginia, right? In the Camping Bowl, right?
They did, yes.
At Chase Field, I actually got at COVID, so I couldn't go.
Oh no, that was you're talking the game in Arizona. That was Minnesota and West Virginia, and Minnesota won. Maryland played Virginia Tech, but they won there too.
Yeah. So I got the ends mixed up. Okay, yeah, that I was bummed I didn't get to go to that game because I got free tickets to that. That would have been fun. But you start their non-conference Buffalo. Then they start Big Ten play in Ann Arbor against Michigan. Then Purdue at Indiana, Northwestern at Wisconsin State, Ohio State, and Rutgers. Their win total is set at 5.5. I see 6 almost for sure losses. 5 for sure losses. I see Ohio State, Penn State, Wisconsin, Michigan State. That's 5 easy losses. Rutgers at home and Northwestern at home should be winnable games. Purdue at home, I think should still be a winnable game. I don't know how good Indiana's going to be, but I would chalk that up to Indiana on the road. And then, again, this is one of those ones where it's going to be either 6-6 or it's going to be 5-7. I think reasonably with the schedule, I would probably still go 6-6 because I think they'll still go 3-0 in the non-con. I don't think Charlotte or Buffalo is going to give them too many issues. And then SMU's good, but at home, I think Maryland can take care of them. And then I think they'll beat either Purdue. I think they'll beat Purdue, Indiana, or at least Purdue, Northwestern, and Rutgers at home. So I think their losses are Michigan, Michigan State. It's probably Michigan, Michigan State, Wisconsin, Penn State, Ohio State, and take your pick between Purdue or Indiana. But conference games, so I'm going to go just over.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in the middle there too, because I think they're either gonna go like 5-7, 6-6, or 7-5. I think they're
brutal schedule.
Yeah, I think Michigan State, they're not winning either of those. Wisconsin, Penn State, Ohio State, they're not winning any of those either. Especially since both Wisconsin and Penn State are on the road. And then Ohio State, we just know how good they are. Maryland doesn't have the talent to beat them. And then it's going to depend on the Purdue and SMU games. Because those are 50-50s, I think. Purdue going to Maryland will be interesting because Purdue is kind of like Iowa, and where they don't play well on the road. They struggle away from directionally challenged Lafayette. West Lafayette is where they actually are, but Purdue and SMU are going to be the big games for them. I'm gonna go with over because I'm gonna give them one of the games and then they'll lose the other one. But I think it's definitely possible that they could go under and go 5-7. But I give them one of the games and they go 6-6, so they go 500.
Awesome, awesome. So we both go over on that one. Let us start here. We've got the Scarlet Knights, who ended up even though they went 5-7. I called it at the beginning of the year they were gonna go bowling, and I was so bummed when they missed. Texas A&M had to pull out. So you know what? Rutgers got to play Wake Forest in probably one of the worst bowl games ever because you put a 5-7 team against a 9-3 team.
Weirdly enough, that actually was a really good game. It was actually kind of competitive.
We have Rutgers. Oh, if you start the season at college, then Wagner and at Temple in the non-con. Then you play Iowa at home. Then you go to Columbus to take on Ohio State. Then you welcome Nebraska and Indiana. Then you go on the road to Minnesota. Then you take a trip to, and then you welcome Michigan. Then you go on a trip to East Lansing. Oh my gosh, they alternate home and ways. Then you go to you bring Penn State to your, and you go on the road to Maryland the season.
To College Park.
Vegas has their over under total 4.5. I'm gonna say reasonably 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh yeah. Oh, that's a tricky one. Think I might go with 4 wins. I don't know. College is a toss up. I have two mid-tier teams playing each other. Iowa, I would probably, even though it's on the road, I would still take Iowa in that game. At Ohio State's a loss. Nebraska and Indiana, I think they win both of them. I think they win against Wagner and Temple. And then at Minnesota's probably a loss. Michigan's a loss. Penn State's a loss. At Michigan State's a loss. And I would favor Maryland at home. So outside of Nebraska and Indiana, maybe they trip up Iowa, Penn State, and or Michigan at home. But I'm probably gonna go under and give them 4-8 this year. They got a tough schedule.
Yeah, I'm definitely going under. This is a rough schedule for Rutgers.
On the road is not a fun
That's that's a really rough opening game going to the road to take on Boston College.
Temple and Wagner should be easy, even if it's on the road against Temple State. So
Yeah, but I'm still going under for Rutgers because I only see like 3-ish games of which they could easily win. That being Indiana, Wagner, and then Temple. Because I think Nebraska is an interesting. Nebraska's going to be an interesting team because they now have Casey Thompson. It's no longer going to be Adrian Martinez. He transferred away. And I think Casey Thompson, he was a solid quarterback at Texas, so we'll see how he does with Nebraska. I mean, there's also Chuba Purdy who's trying to compete for that spot. But I think Nebraska will be better this year. And I mean, it's possible they can still win, but I'm still going under for Rutgers. So even if they win that, they'd still only have 4.
Exactly. And now we go to the Indiana Hoosiers, the bottom of the Big Ten East. They had a rough season last year, going 2-10. They started Illinois, and then they play, and then they also, oh my gosh, They welcome Illinois. Then they Idaho and Western. Then they go on the road to Cincinnati. Yikes again. Nebraska on the road. Michigan on State at Michigan State, and then ending the season at home against Purdue. These are always the toughest ones because if you're like a mid-tier to bottom-tier team who's trying to get to 6-6, you games at home and teams lose to on the road. Like that's what I am with the Syracuse fan. I'm like, give me Clemson on the road, give me like Florida State on the road, like give me all the teams that I know we're gonna lose to on the road. Give me the teams that we can beat at home. That does not happen here. They do have Illinois at home, which should be a win, but Illinois is pretty good too, so I don't know about that one. Idaho and Western Kentucky probably 4 wins right there. Oh, also their over under is 4.5. At Cincinnati, I don't see them winning that. At Nebraska, I don't see them winning that. Michigan, I don't see them winning. Maryland at home, I could see them winning, getting to 4, and then the rest of the schedule, I don't see them winning. Purdue owns this rivalry as of recently. Penn I don't see them beating Penn State at home, and then on the road against Ohio State, Michigan State, I would go under on this one as well and give them 4.5 or at 4-8.
Yeah, I'm going under for Indiana as well. I was actually about because I Illinois is I think a better team than people think. I mean, they don't have Brandon
Yeah.
Peters, and so Brandon Peters is gone, but they still have the former Syracuse starter Tommy DeVito, and they also have Art Sitkowski.
Oh, don't like much anymore. Tommy DeVito? Oh, sorry. Oh, he's
Still, Indiana, they don't have Michael Penix. He transferred away to Washington, and this Indiana team didn't get much in terms of transfers or recruiting. And still, Illinois, I think, is the better team. But I think that's a 50-50 game. That'll be a fun early one to see. Um, then other than that, they'll probably beat. They'll beat Idaho. Western Kentucky no longer has their great quarterback, so I think they win that one. They don't beat Cincinnati. They're not beating Nebraska or Michigan. Likely aren't beating Maryland, but they have a small chance there. I think Rutgers knocks them off, especially with Rutgers being home. Penn State, that'll be an interesting one with it being home, but I think that's one for Penn State. Ohio State, Michigan State will both kill them, and Purdue is going to beat Indiana. So, yeah, definitely under.
oh man, Penn State has a rough schedule.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so their win total is at 8.5. So keep in mind they have to win 9 games to go over. They got to start the season at Purdue, and they play Ohio, and then they got to go to Auburn. I don't care. I don't care if Auburn's not that good. They're an SEC team. That's scary enough. And then they got Central Michigan. Then they got Northwestern at home. Then they go to Ann Arbor. You got Minnesota and Ohio State at home. On the road against Indiana. At home against Rutgers. I see two losses that I'm for sure on, and the 2 losses I'm pretty sure on. So I'm gonna go under. I think they're gonna go 8-4. I think they're gonna lose to Purdue, Auburn, Michigan, and Ohio State. They could easily win Purdue or Auburn. I just think being on the road, I think Purdue and Auburn are going to be tougher. And then I chalk up Ohio State, Michigan to losses. I chalk up Ohio State to losses on basically everybody, and then Michigan on the road is going to be tricky. And then they could trip up somewhere else too, but I think 8-4. I think 9-3 is really high for this team. Especially if your quarterback Sean Clifford.
Yeah, like I said in the other video for Penn State, this is really going to depend on how well their running game plays. Because that's what they lacked last season. If they had, like a solid, at least like average running game last season, they would have had an incredible season and they would have been right in the mix with the rest of the Big Ten East. But because they didn't have a running game last year, they weren't able to. Because they had like an average running game, well, everyone would have had to respect their pass, would have had to respect it, and would have had to lay back a little bit. They would have had to prepare for them actually running the football. but because they couldn't, they just got to double cover Jahan Dotson every other play, and they got nowhere on the field. Um,
They could make a 2-point conversion in 9 overtimes. I mean, they made 1 or 2, but that was such a game. I still can't believe that happened.
that was a bad game, is what that was.
It was. I'll tell you something though. It was hard to watch, but it was that you just cannot take your eyes off of. It was so much fun. Terrible it was.
But if they had like a legitimate running game last year, I think there's another 3 games that they end up winning. That being Michigan, Ohio State, and yeah, I'm forgetting the other one, Illinois. They win those 3 games with a better rushing attack, and then their other game was Michigan. They could have won every other game last year with them having a better running attack. And this season, I do think they have a much better running game. They got a couple nice recruits in at running back, so we'll see how they play. But definitely, Purdue, Auburn, right off the bat, pretty much on the road, is pure evil. That's very difficult. Purdue, West Lafayette is very difficult, especially it being the first game of the season. You have not played a game yet. And Purdue is already very difficult to beat, and they still have their starting quarterback from last season. Purdue is missing their wide receiver, of course. They don't have David Moore, or no, David Bell, not David Moore, David Bell. I'm thinking Rondale Moore. I'm trying to pair it with David Bell. They don't. Well, they don't have either of them now, but Purdue is a solid team, and it's going to be difficult to win. I don't think they beat Auburn on the road. Auburn is I think Auburn knocks them off, especially at Jordan Hare. I don't think Penn State wins that. They won't beat the Wolverines. They're not beating the Buckeyes. They'll have a tough time, I think, against Michigan State. And then it comes down to whether they'll beat Minnesota or not. I think they go about 8-4, or they maybe can go 9-3, but I have 8-4 for them, so I'm going under.
We split up divisions, so Big Ten East. Video for we'll probably end up dropping both Big Ten teams or both Big Ten videos at the same time.
Yeah.
But it makes it easier if we do them in 2 smaller videos. So that is it for the Big Ten East. After this, go check out the Big Ten West. Check out some of our other videos. I don't know where any of the links are anymore because I haven't been here in a while. But there's probably playlists and stuff that you can check out for different college football stuff. Like he said, he plugged the coaching carousel video, so go check that out. I didn't know half the people transferred, so that we will see you guys later. Peace.
Adios, everybody.